Hey, everybody, and welcome to the TWISI podcast. That's right, the way I see it. And this podcast is brought to you by Grown Folks Grooves and Next Phase Fitness. Make sure you guys go to the YouTube channel, subscribe, and turn on the notifications because you don't want to miss what me and my man Terry doing. How you doing, Terry?
Maintaining, buddy. You know what I'm saying? It's another day, another week of the TWISI podcast. Once again, we predicted it correctly.
We did it.
And we should be called like the podcast messiahs.
No doubt. The news Nostradamuses.
I'm trying to tell you. They playing. We called it how we see it.
We called the lockdown. We called
the way I see it because
That's
we see
right.
it right.
That's right. We called the third lockdown. We here now, and you know what, Terry? The things have gotten a little bit even more shaky and sketchy because now they're talking about there's a different strain, a variation on the virus, and that just can turn the whole thing into something different and a whole bunch of new turmoil. What do you think about this new strain and how that's going to affect us, man?
It's funny you mentioned that. I just got off the phone with an ER nurse in one of the hospitals in London. She's actually a client of mine. And we were talking about how bad this particular stage of the pandemic is as opposed to the previous phases of it. And she mentioned that she's more concerned now than she was back in March.
Is that right?
Because in in America, it's really bad because some hospitals are just basically, they're just basically overscribed when it comes to hospital beds and things of that nature. But over here in the UK, in London especially, the new strand apparently, for some reason, has gotten a hold of London, and London is harder than elsewhere. So she was saying if you break your shoulder or you get hurt for anything that's non-emergency, you fresh out of luck, you short, because you might be there for days. And on that note, I was speaking to another client. He said his buddy broke his collarbone like 3 days ago, and he was in the hospital for 3 days before he got to bed.
Get out of here, really?
Yeah, so he was there. They finally took care of him. It took 3 days. So he didn't want to go home. They have to come back. So he stayed there for 3 days until they gave him a bed. That's in London. So she was saying that this particular client, the ER nurse, was saying that the new strands are a bit worrying because now what's happening is that their particular hospital is at max capacity when it comes to hospital beds. And like she said, if you don't have an emergency, you ain't gonna be seen immediately. So
don't involve.
So there is a bit of seriousness and severity to that, and there might be some truth. I think there's definitely some truth to it because that's what I got firsthand on the front line.
Yeah, and another thing that may come out of this as a benefit, because you don't need to be going to the hospital for frivolous things. It may actually, in the long run, once we get through this, take some of the strain off the NHS, because people are going to the NHS with, I got a cut on my finger, a paper cut, I got a headache, come pick me up for the ambulance. So in the long run, because they're not being able to go into A&E with all kind of foolishness, it may, in the long run, help the NHS and people start really using it for what it's used for.
Yeah, I mean, for the viewers around the world who aren't familiar with the NHS is the National Health Trust in the UK, and the National Health Trust, or NHS for short, is free to the public. So rich or poor, middle class, everyone has free access to the medical care in the UK. And unlike in America, where you got to have insurance to go be seen, here in the UK, it's all paid through centralized by ways of the government taxes and stuff like that. So, because it's free, that's why sometimes, as Konrad was saying, that people take advantage of the fact that it's free and they go to the hospital for any damn thing. And that puts further more restraint on the NHS staff. Now, topple that with COVID, which is a global catastrophe and pandemic, it makes it even harder for people like my client who, being on the front line, ER nurses or nurses in general and doctors, they have to deal with that as well as other cases. So yeah, man, I think this time around, I think more than ever, I'm taking a little bit more serious because obviously I had the COVID test for my family a couple of days ago. We all came out negative, but we used it because we just felt like um, my eldest daughter was coughing a lot, so one of the teachers just suggested to my wife that maybe just go get a check, just so she doesn't bring anything to the other kids because it's getting like that now. If you sneeze hard around somebody, they think COVID,
Yeah.
and I thought there was nothing wrong with it, and I was proven right. But nonetheless, if you can take the test, obviously you can't take the test, and there's nothing wrong with you, which I think is also foolishness because why do you have to wait till something wrong with you before you take the test? You know what I mean? So it should just be encouraging people to take the test regardless, and that way we can all ascertain whether or not you sick, got it, or you don't have it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to see more tests being given if they have it, and I know they do, to check people to see if they have the antibodies. So maybe they had COVID, like our friend who had COVID, and now you can check and see, okay, well, do you have the antibodies, and they can get a better understanding of how long the antibodies last and all that kind of stuff. Because this is a funny one. They say the antibodies don't last forever; they start to decline.
Yeah, I mean, it's still a lot to be said about the antibodies as well as the vaccine because when you actually have those antibodies, it makes it really hard to determine whether or not you have uh, whether or not it is something that needs to be determined via medical concerns or what have you. But I think that the thing about COVID more than anything else that we need to be, uh, I guess, need to be taken a little bit more seriously is that the education around the actual virus, that education needs to be put to the forefront, and the vaccination, in my view, um, there is a lot of. We'll get to the vaccine. I'm going to fast forward to the vaccine because I think that's where we were going to. A segue to the vaccine because I think that's where we're heading. The vaccination to me is the caveat to the conversation because where a lot of people are apprehensive in general about vaccination, especially if you're an ethnic minority, there needs to be more clarity about the vaccination, the vaccine. So if the vaccine is seen as something that, however it's come about, that needs to be clear. So the education about the disease is one thing. The education or the virus, the education about the vaccine needs to be clear because in my point of view, if you're an ethnic minority and you have a bad historical experience about vaccines or whatever else, the last thing you want to do is take a vaccine because historically you're going to say, well, my people haven't had a good shake of the stick when it comes to vaccine. We've always been experimenting on whatever else.
Yeah.
So the education should be very clear. Okay, this vaccine's come about because we put a bit of money into fast tracking this thing because we're a bit nervous about the global spread of this thing, unlike any other vaccine or any other virus in the past.
Yep.
Why? Well, we're more concerned now because how easy the virus. You know what I mean? It's just these very simple, clear, transparent conversations need to be had and conveyed to the public because if you don't talk in these clear lines, dudes like me and you would be like, man, I ain't taking a goddamn thing. Because they ain't saying it the way that we like to hear it. So it's easier for us to digest so we can trust what they're doing.
Yeah. And I think one of the other points that needs to be brought up, and it's really important, is that our leaders are getting behind it and they're not giving misinformation and they're leading by example. Like Sadiq Khan, you've got even Mike Pence, and you've got Joe Biden, who's scheduled to take the vaccine next week. And I think that's important that we see prominent leaders that have confidence in the vaccine to alleviate people's, apprehensions about taking it. Because let me tell you, this thing has killed over 300,000 people in the U.S., over 66,000 people in the UK. It's a monster thing, and if you crazy enough to think that it's a hoax, shame on you. And I feel sorry for you because, you know, it's not a hoax. It's not a joke. It's a real thing. And you know, I've also found out, and this is kind of funny. The people that are talking about, oh no, I'm not gonna take the vaccine. I don't believe it. I don't trust it. They so far down the line to get the vaccine, it's not even funny because they're taking care of the frontline staff, NHS. Same in America, they're taking care of the health workers, and then on top of that, they're taking care of the elderly and the vulnerable. So you may be well, young, and fit. You ain't got no danger of getting the vaccine no time soon. So you can go ahead and sit down and cool your heels and be quiet for real.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the general public, according to Dr. Fauci, he was saying the U.S., he was saying the general public, the Joe Blow on the street, probably won't be getting the vaccine or eligible to get the vaccine until like April, May of next year anyway.
Yeah.
And that's it. That's a lot depends on how they roll it out, how much of it they roll out, whether or not the first batch was successful. There's a lot that's dependent upon this current batch that's come out and how successful it is in the U.S. and around the world. I mean, some parts of the world haven't even got their first batch of it anyway. So there's a lot to be said about whether or not this current batch of vaccinations is successful. So, man, it's so up in the air. I mean, but once again, it goes back to the clarity. You just got to be clear with the Joe public, man, because the dude on the street just wants you to tell him how it is and don't beat around the bush. And it going back to this lockdown demonstration, you take Australia, for example. I know it's hard being on lockdown, being stuck in the same house, but you're missing for 24/7. We love our families and our kids, but, you know, it's hard because there's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to escape. And, you know, you and I, we're lucky. We don't own a home and a house and a garden, a decent-sized garden. So we can run around the garden butt naked if we want to. But, you know, some people live in an apartment to where they can't really, if they let's say go outside, that's it. They're in that domain. And, you know, a country like Australia, which has vast landmass and space, they were on a lockdown from the time COVID broke out early March, and they only just opened up their doors to the public like a month ago. Like place like Melbourne were locked down. You couldn't go to the gym. You couldn't go anywhere. And so whereas here they opened up everything, some people say too soon. So we've had 2 lockdowns. Some countries like Australia, which is like 3 times the size of the UK, okay, albeit has less people, but they just open their doors to the public to go outside and stop the mingling within reason. And the countries that have been hit the hardest, the US and the UK, is because their transparency and their rules about lockdown and containment have actually been seen as the slackest.
Yeah, they have. They really haven't. And like we said on the previous podcast, I don't think a lot of people understand what the TWISI mean. You explained it, but even still, you know, it's so confusing, you know, and it changes so frequently. You're in tier 2 one day, you're in tier 3 the next day. And now they talk about having this 5-day break when Christmas comes. Man, I don't even know what to do. So I'm kind of just sticking and acting like I'm still in lockdown for real, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to someone the other day, and she was saying that she's from New York, and she's over here visiting actually visiting her boyfriend, who's actually a client of ours here. And she was saying that in New York now, they had tiers, very similar thing to what the UK has implemented. And now they got a thing called color schemes. So now tier 1 is now been replaced with maybe blue, and tier 2 might be amber, and tier 3 might be red over there, whatever color scheme they have.
Yeah.
And I think they have zones. So yeah, you hear the next phase videos. We don't stop for business. I'm doing a podcast. Excuse me, y'all. Hello, Terry speaking. Next phase. No, I'll call you back. Let me call you back.
Keep it real here on the TWISI podcast. Y'all get to see how things are
doing a podcast, and you can see me live and direct, man. We're doing a podcast. Leave me alone. Sorry, I don't mean that, y'all. Call
they trying to get on.
Next phase.
They trying to get on, Terry. Hey, look, bring me in.
Yeah, I know, right? He's like, man, I got something to talk about. Um, yeah, it's all happening here at the Next Phase Studios. Yeah, man. So, yeah, they have the color scheme in New York City. So that's what I guess the zones might mean. I don't really understand it myself because I don't live in New York. But they were saying that the zones might mean that you can't go certain places if it's a zone 3, if it's a high zone or a low zone or whatever. But yeah, so it's not new. The tier system. It's not like it's the UK government being very clever. I just think that it's something that it just, like I said, just needs to be clearer what the zones really mean and tiers really mean, so the average Joe Blow can hear. But it's serious, man. I mean, anyone who think, like you said, Konrad, anyone who think this thing is not real is living in la la land. The only thing that needs to be clearer is the information around or surrounding this virus. If they could do a better job of explaining that and making it clear to the Joe public, I think they can get through to everybody.
Yeah. So let's move on to the next subject. So I wanted to talk to you about my man because it's gotten crazy. He's lost 30, and I'm talking about Orange Travesty. He's lost
45. My man, 45.
Yeah, 45. Code 45. He's
45.
lost 30 cases that he's tried to get seen by judges, be it in local courts, regional courts, or the Supreme Court. And now word came out the other day that this fool is walking. He's doing two things that I want to talk about. One is he's talking about I ain't leaving, and we know that ain't the truth. He is leaving by hook or by crook, and he's gone on a pardoning spree. It's so many people. Okay, so the way that the pardon system works with the president is he goes out and he looks for things that he thinks should be righted, wrongs that should be righted. He looks for people that need to have pardons. This has been flipped on its head. The script has been flipped, and now people are calling in asking for pardons. There's so many people have called that they have a spreadsheet to manage the request for pardons. And you know the first thing he's gonna do is gonna go through his family and make sure everybody on there, yep, I got you. And then all the people that know where the bodies is buried, I got you. So this is absolutely ridiculous. It's never been done before. It's unprecedented. And people are still falling behind this guy with the cult status that he has. And I'm just hoping that it doesn't get to a point where we have civil unrest in America. And I say that because some of the Republicans have come out and said that they're going to speak out when the votes are counted on January the 6th and try to protest what has already been proven. And if that doesn't happen, there's talks that the Proud Boys or the Poor Boys or I don't know, whatever they're called, are going to try to act up and do some craziness. What do you think is the possibility of any of that happening as far as being civil unrest and these Republicans speaking out saying, "No, we ain't buying this, and we want to overthrow it. We want to turn it over"?
Well, I mean that's a loaded question. I mean, but I mean, like the thing is, when it comes to America having civil unrest, it's all within context, isn't it? So you say civil unrest, like everybody grabbing a gun, trying to shoot each other, like the Wild Wild West. You know, it's possible, but I don't think that's happening. But I would go as far as saying there's been civil unrest in America for the last 20 years. It's hyperboiled to some extent, but it's been happening gradually, just intensifying in certain spots. But civil unrest could be the drug game. Civil unrest could be the racial tension. There was civil unrest when Obama got elected. There was civil unrest when Obama stayed elected, when he got his second term. So there's always been civil unrest in America. It's just whether or not the scale matches the conversation or the context of the conversation. So I just believe that civil unrest in America, if you're trying to say it's going to be like it was during the Civil War, I think we're above that, because as a country, we're a bit more solid than that than it was 150 years ago. And I don't really think that America will retract to that. I would be surprised if they ever got to anything close to that. But, you know, just to ask you a question, I mean, to touch on that subject even more so, I think that what 45 has done, and I've always said this, and we've touched upon this in previous podcasts, is that he has just created this sort of sympathetic base towards those who feel that the right in terms of how the country should be led within the hands through whites, or the white male, or the dominant white male. It's because it all boils down to that. The dominant white male has to always be seen as a dominant white male. So Rich McConnell, who was an old white male, has been in politics pretty much all of his life, as well as Biden has. So put Trump aside. All these dominant white males have been in politics for many, many years and have had their way of having policies that has governed people who are affected by their policies, and primarily ethnic minorities. What Trump has done very, whether it's devious, clever, or whatever you want to put as an adjective to describe what he's done, he's basically come along and said to anyone who has fears about the dominant white male not being effective in America, he just said, don't worry about it. We're still in business. And if you are fearful of your dominance, be fearful, and let's do whatever we can to remind these people who aren't like us to be fearful of us. And I think that's the underlying message he's done that the liberals are sort of concerned about. Yeah. And people who are ethnic minorities who have been awoken to this sort of dynamic social disruption. That's what they're looking at. They're looking at, are we going to sort of like regress back to where we were similarly in the 1970s or the 1960s?
Further back, 1950s.
Yeah, I mean, that's what people are fearful of, as opposed to it being some bang, bang, let's shoot me and I shoot you, that sort of thing. Because that level of violence has been there. It hasn't gone anywhere. The police violence has been there. It hasn't gone anywhere. Like you always said, the only difference between now and 25 years ago is everybody got a phone. Yeah. So you can record it now. So that's the reason why this is, and social media has made everything become more enlightened. That hasn't changed. I've been living in London for the last 19 years. I've been telling everybody since I've been here how violent America is with police brutality, Absolutely. Blah, 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 blah. And they thought I was saying something, I was talking on the side of my neck. Now, 2020, they're seeing it and they're like, damn, it's that bad. I'm like, I tried to tell y'all it was that bad. Now y'all see what I'm talking about. So that's nothing new to us. And if you're a black man, you're not a stranger to racism. You're not a stranger to social injustice, police brutality, education discrimination, housing discrimination. The list goes on and on. That's not new. That's a generational thing. Yeah. What's happening now is that the challenge to that is now become more focal, and white folks as well as black folks are joining in that conversation and in that struggle. That's what's shaking the dominant white male, and it's making him feel a little bit more alienated, because now he's thinking, shit, I had it my way for so long. Now everybody telling me I was wrong. And I think that sort of paradigm shift is still going to take a while, maybe another generation or two. And that's why I feel that Trump has probably set things back 15, 20 years. And if he's successful, if he dies tomorrow, that's what he's done very successfully, in my view.
Yeah, that's for sure. The other thing, as far as him, is looking at his legacy. Every president wants to, be known for something. He's going to be known for being obstructive, primarily. He's going to, and that's probably being a little generous, because there are going to be at least 70 million people who think that he's the best thing since butter bread. But the record will show, all of the news agencies and the way history is going to be written, it's going to show that actually he was one of the most obstructive and damaging presidents to ever be in office. Because you've got him on record saying things like, yeah, well, stand back, stand by. There were good people on both sides. And his record for corruption. I mean, the guy's got the New York State's attorney waiting for him to come out of office so she can go ahead and put paper on him. So it's going to be a funny thing to see, what's really written in the history books about what this guy did. Uh, One other thing I wanted to say, I want to let everybody know, and this is probably a surprise to you, Terry. I thought about it. What we're going to start doing is we're going to do movie reviews and book reviews as well. So you'll be able to check us out on this channel, and we'll talk about the latest book we read or the latest movie we've seen, and give you a rundown on what we think about that. And I think the first one that I want to do is, and it's going along the same thing, American Skin by Spike Lee. Have you heard or seen the trailers for that yet, T?
No, I haven't. No.
Oh man, it's Spike Lee all over. He's addressing the issue of cops killing black people, and it starts off, the trailer itself shows how a man and his father are pulled over by the police in the night, and his son ends up getting killed, from what I can tell from the trailer, and it just goes on from there, I guess, to take you through what that whole situation is. So you can look for that on one of the upcoming TWISI podcasts. We're going to be telling you about the books we've read. We're going to tell you about movies we've seen and things like that as well. What's the next topic you got for us, Terry?
Well, I mean, I think the last one we'll talk about is I think we should end up with the Biden Harris, Joe Biden Harris sort of juggernaut, because they're gonna have to come through with with a sort of like a cosmic force to try to ensure confidence in the American public. And the reason why the American situation is very important to the rest of the world, because America somehow has become the focal point of democracy globally. And whenever something is unsuccessful in America, it seems to have a trickle down effect to various countries, whether that's rightly or wrongly.
Yeah.
That seems to be because America prided itself during the 60s and the 70s as being at the forefront of democracy. And even during the Vietnam War, the so-called premise of the war was democracy versus communism. And, so America's always said that we're the leaders of democracy. So the thing that we should take as a take-home message is that I've always said this, that the American Constitution was a clever document.
Oh, absolutely.
It was a clever document because it was written over 200 years ago. And it was done by men who were stone cold racists at that time. The then president of the United States had slaves himself.
Yeah.
And even the president that followed, by and large, covertly had their hands in institutional racism and condoned it, even on up to the civil rights movement. So it is important to understand that when Trump is trying to buck the trend or somehow have his say in how the Constitution should be implemented because he lost the election, it's interesting to see, because for me, it makes you as a viewer, if we're all from the outside looking in, because we live in the UK now, we're not actually living in the United States. It's interesting to see just the sort of backlash that he's getting, as well as the Republicans are getting, because the dynamics behind Trump means that they are, in themselves, systematically challenging the Constitution.
Yes,
I think that's important to see, because the document was created to protect itself, from a dictator. So the American Constitution was written to protect itself from a dictator or from someone coming along and says, "No, actually, I want to rewrite the Constitution and make it one else." So that's what I think have a look at that and the inauguration coming up, and just watch all the events and the scenes around that, because I think that's worth watching.
absolutely. And to lead on from what you were saying about the Constitution, which is a great thing, because earlier this week, I actually did a Facebook post and I gave a shout out to the writers of the Constitution, because they did such a fantastic job to help us navigate through situations like we're going through right now. And a lot of the spirit of the Constitution has been misconstrued or misunderstood. So if you look at the Second Amendment, the Second Amendment says the right to bear arms, and the spirit behind that was to keep any dictatorship being created or any other force coming into the country and taking over the country. So that was what the right to bear arms was for. It was not so that you could go around killing your fellow man or whatever a lot of people take it out for. And you got your stand your ground thing and all that kind of stuff now. But the Constitution is a very strong document. It was a well-written document. It was a well-thought-out document. They didn't just sit down and decide they were going to come up with a bunch of things that really didn't look to the future to see on.
The truth is, the document wasn't created by having us in mind, so it wasn't really written for us.
No,
but that was the one thing I will say about the Constitution. It wasn't written for the benefit of ethnic minorities or black folks, even though it says in the Constitution we all created equal under our law. But that was probably the one segue that ethnic minorities could look at and say, okay, that clause meant that if we're all supposed to be the same under the eyes of the law, that means us too. But it's true what you said. It's a very clever document. And like I said, it's very interesting to see whether or not, well, we know it won't happen. He has to leave come January 20th. But the scenes behind that is going to be, that's the thing to watch.
Yeah. They're going to take him up out of there like a snatch man to take a 76 Buick that ain't made a payment in 3 months. I'm telling you now.
Ain't that a bitch?
Yeah, I've been there. Hey, look, thank you guys for joining us for the TWISI podcast. I'm Konrad. This is my man, Terry. So this podcast was brought to you once again by Grown Folks Cruise and Next Phase Fitness. So make sure you go and check us out on our relative websites, on our Facebook sites, all of our social media. And we will see you guys next week. What you want to say to the people before we go, Terry?
Well, it's to stay, remember this coronavirus is real. Wherever you are in the world, just abide by the regulations. Even if you don't like it, you don't agree with it. If you got to wear a face mask, wear a face mask. You got to stay your monkey ass in the house, stay your ass in the house, because it's keeping you safe, it's keeping everybody else safe. Until we get back to whatever the normality may be, or whatever normal is, the new normal, just abide by the rules, man, and just keep everybody protected as well as yourself, and stay safe and healthy. And man, we're gonna get through this thing.
Absolutely. All right, guys, this is the TWISI podcast. We out.
Peace out.
Peace.